We're going to launch on into 70 years later, what Brown cannot do. I hope you're able to get some refreshments. I'm going to start by introducing our panelists and then our moderator, and then I'll turn it over to our moderator. Dr. Gregory C. Hutchings, Jr. is a nationally recognized educational leader, anti-racism activist, and published author who unapologetically advocates for racial equity on behalf of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. He currently serves as an assistant professor and program coordinator in the School of Education's Educational Leadership and Policy Studies program at Howard University. Dr. Hutchings is also the founder and CEO of an educational consulting firm, Revolutionary Ed. That's right. Revolutionary Ed, LLC, that supports schools and school systems across the country to dismantle systemic racism in education. Dr. Hutchings has over 24 years of combined educational experience as a college admissions counselor, teacher, school principal, central office administrator, superintendent, and now college professor. Dr. Hutchings' research focuses on the African-American superintendent and their challenges faced by advocating for anti-racism in school systems in this country. He's the co-author of the book, Getting in Good Trouble at School, a guide to building an anti-racist school system, and has contributed his expertise in education on CNN with Jake Tapper. They're having fun already. I hope y'all ready. The Kojo Nadmi Show, a C-SPAN, NPR, and an opinion writer for Ed Week. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Hutchings. We also have with us Amari McGee. Amari McGee is an award-winning LGBTQ advocate, educator, and researcher, originally hailing from the vibrant city of Cleveland, Ohio. He has made significant, I should also say Shaker Heights, Ohio. I got a rep, Shaker Heights, Ohio. He has made significant strides in promoting understanding and acceptance within the community. His personal journey, marked by a transformative female to male transition in 2018, served as a catalyst for his passionate advocacy work. This life-changing experience not only reshaped Amari's personal identity, but also ignited a fervent desire to educate and support others navigating similar paths. Amari's achievements include winning the Pioneer of Education Award at the 2023 Trans Life Awards and being featured in the Washington Post and the USA Today for his advocacy work. Please, thank you for joining us, Amari. And we also have with us Professor Erika K. Wilson. Professor Wilson is a professor of law at the Wade Edwards Distinguished School at the University of North Carolina, UNC School of Law, for a little while left until she moves on to NYU in the next academic year. But Professor Wilson's area of expertise includes civil litigation, civil rights, clinical legal education, critical race theory, education law, and public policy. Professor Wilson's scholarship has or is forthcoming in the Harvard Law Review, Columbia Law Review, Yale Law Journal Forum, Cornell Law Review, Northwestern Law Review, and the UCLA Law Review. She's a prolific scholar and someone that I admire greatly. In 2016, Professor Wilson's work was selected for a presentation at the Harvard-Yale Stanford Junior Faculty Forum. And in 2017 and 2022, she was awarded the James H. Chadbourne Award for Excellence in Scholarship at the UNC School of Law. Her scholarship was recently cited in the United States Supreme Court Justice Sotomayor's dissenting opinion in the Students for Fair Admissions, Inc. versus Presidents and Fellows of Harvard College. Professor Wilson is also the founder of the Critical Race Lawyering Civil Rights Clinic, a clinic that teaches law students how to bridge the gap between critical race theory as an academic discipline and the practice of law. This panel, What Brown Cannot Do, will be moderated by the amazing
Please.
The kind, the gracious, the brilliant Habeebah Rashid Grimes. Habeebah has made serving Northeast Ohio's most vulnerable children her life's work. She is a sought-after public speaker. Indeed, I call on her regularly. A community leader and the creator of No Crystal Stair podcast. As CEO of Positive Education Program, or PEP, as many in the room may know it, Grimes leads a staff of nearly 400 professionals committed to supporting healing in children who have experienced significant adversity and mental health challenges. She's deeply committed to responding to trauma as a collective and embodied experience. Her current focus is providing leadership in support of culturally affirming and healing center practices at PEP and in the broader community. Grimes is extensively trained in trauma-informed practices and holds a master's degree in clinical counseling psychology and a specialist degree in school psychology from Cleveland State University. A recent appointee to the board of Prevent Child Abuse America, Grimes also serves as a trustee for the Woodruff Foundation, which provides philanthropic support to nonprofit organizations addressing behavioral needs in Cuyahoga County. Please join me in welcoming our panelists as I turn it over to Ms. Grimes.
Thank you, Professor Bill Hardaway, who is also brilliant and inspiring and courageous and all the things our community needs, particularly in these times. So thank you for that introduction. Thank you to our panelists. I'm a little intimidated after those bios, but we gonna do this. We gonna get through it. And I'm sure you're going to bring a tremendous amount of insight, perspective, and charge for us coming out of this conversation. So I will start to my left, and what we'll do is first allow you all to say a few words about your work, about the connection of your work to our topic today, what Brown cannot do, and we'll get into some Q&A from me first and then the audience.
It's a pleasure to be here today, and especially to talk about this issue of Brown at 70 or after 70 at this point. So in terms of my work, I research and write about the intersection between race, class, education policies, and the law. And so one thing that I like to make clear in my work is the role that law plays in structuring white supremacy. And I think what we see with Brown, and 70 years after Brown in particular, highlights the ways in which the law fortifies white supremacy, even when it changes form, I'll say that much. And so I write about school segregation from the perspective of white students. One thing that people often miss about Brown versus Board of Education is that many of you may be familiar with the famous doll test, the social science evidence that was used by the court to support its holding, with the research showing that Black children felt a sense of inferiority. They labeled themselves as less than when given the doll. What people don't know is that the lawyers who litigated that case also presented compelling evidence of the effects of segregation on white students. And what they found and cited in their moving papers is relevant today. They found that segregation for whites imbued them with a sense of superiority, a likeliness of embracing authoritarianism, and a desire to subordinate and remain on top. That may sound very familiar to what's happening with the politics today a little bit. And so I write about segregation and the harms caused by white student segregation. When we think about segregation, we always think about it from the perspective of poor Black and brown children, but there are material harms of white student segregation, both psychological and material harm. And so my most recent work talks about the ways in which school assignment allows for white monopolization of high quality schools and the material effects of that white monopolization of high quality schools on communities of color and on our entire school ecosystem. So I'm excited to talk more about this in the question and answer session, but that is where I'm coming from.
Thank you, Professor Wilson. we don't talk enough about how white supremacy is impacting white people and the harm it's causing, the trauma it's inflicting, to see the world through a lens of white supremacy. So thank you. I'm excited to get into the conversation around that. Amari, welcome.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amari McGee. I'm currently a graduate student at Arizona State University studying my master's in social justice and human rights. Also getting a minor in LGBTQ plus studies as well. My research interests are mostly in transgender studies, gender and sexuality studies, queer theory, and also transgender history. A lot of my work that you're going to that I want to talk about a lot today is really more about how I'm working with corporate 500 companies and also higher education to basically include intersectionality of all people to promote equality in our in what we see in our everyday curriculum, right? For me, being somebody who is a part of multiple intersectionalities and also realizing my privilege that I do have as a Black trans man, I want to incorporate that into making sure that students of all ages can see themselves in our everyday curriculum in our school systems. So a lot of that work was stemmed from that. I'm happy to be here today, and I thank Case for allowing me to be here also as well to talk more about that. And I will kind of highlight a couple of things that I do see as, drivers, barriers, and things of that nature, and what I have been able to research and find throughout my work.
Thank you, Amari. Such a critical component of this discussion is intersectionality around racial identity and gender identity, sexual orientation, and the expression of the LGBTQ plus community and presence. So thank you. I'm excited for that part of the conversation too.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for having me here today. I also want to thank Professor Hardaway and Shaker Heights folks who are here. I'm the former superintendent of Shaker Heights City Schools, so I'm happy to be back home, my second home, not my first home. But I just want to say my research right now is all about anti-racism in education. I think it's going to be really pertinent to this conversation because I have what I call 6 steps to getting into good trouble at school. Right, everybody knows John Lewis. And the first step is really knowing your history. And one thing that we don't do is we don't start with what has happened in our community or in our school. As we just saw the documentary or the little preview that we just saw, a little while ago, the video, there's always a story that gives you an understanding as to why you have disparities when it comes to race. The second thing is around committing to racial equity. And what we don't do, we always talk about equity. The racial equity piece is so important because once you add race to anything, if you're talking about disparities, race just exacerbates the conversation, right, and the data. And a lot of times folks feel very uncomfortable having these racial conversations. And I was talking with someone earlier, no one has the right to be comfortable, right? That is not your God-given right. As a Black man in America, every day I'm uncomfortable. So welcome to my world, right? The third thing is around how do we ensure that we are dismantling de facto segregation, which is happening in our schools, right? It happens with our talented and gifted programs, our special education programs, our English learner programs. And what we are seeing is that, one of the statistics we're going to talk about today is we're seeing more segregation now across America than we did in the 60s and 70s, right? The fourth area is around how do we differentiate between policing and discipline, right? We are seeing a pipeline to prison in our school systems, from kids walking down halls, looking at the floor, to having their hands behind their backs, right? That is a norm in some of our schools. We're training them to go to prison. Right? We're saying that this is a norm, this is a normal thing for Black children, and some people are high-fiving themselves over that. The fifth is around strategic thinking and strategic planning, that they go hand in hand. Your strategic plan gives you that roadmap to success. Your strategic thinking is how do you navigate your way through that. And then finally is all about courageous and bold leadership. Why many of you were here today. When I was thinking of Professor Hardaway when she was up here, I was just saying, this is a woman of vision, integrity, and passion, which I call VIP, right? You have to be able to look beyond today. You have to be able to do what you say you're going to do. You have to have the passion so that you can get up and do this hard work every single day, because when you're trying to fight race and racism in this country, it is very exhausting. If you have not read the book Black Fatigue by Mary Frances Winters, it is real. This is why Black folks are dying early in America. It's not because of the color of our skin and the melanin that we have. It is because we deal with racism every single day, and it's taxing on our bodies, which causes cancer and heart attacks and diabetes and all those other things. But that's a conversation that we're not having, but I'm hoping I'll bring it up today.
Absolutely, Dr. Hutchings. You really laid the foundation for the questions that I want us to get into today. So thank you for that, understanding that there is a context for the suffering, and there are specific tactics and strategies we need to be deploying in order to manage that suffering. Advance equity, specifically racial equity, and lead in ways that help us to move it forward in a new way. So with that, as you mentioned, earlier this year, research out of Stanford University and the University of California found that segregation in our largest school districts has actually been getting worse over the last 30 years. I'm curious what you see as the drivers for this trend and how we should be responding to it. And I'll start with Professor Wilson. What are your thoughts here?
So I want to answer this question from the position of the law and the role that the law is playing in increasing segregation. So when we had Brown versus Board of Education, the Supreme Court struck down what's called de jure segregation, which are intentional laws that require the separation of the races. Everyone knows that case, but I always say there's another case that people should know equally as well, if not more so, and that case is called Milliken versus Bradley. So the Milliken versus Bradley case, in that case, the Supreme Court really underruled Brown in a lot of ways. And what I mean by that is that the court said in that case that you cannot require outerlying suburban districts to be part of a school desegregation order for an urban city. And so that was an important ruling because it gave incentive for more suburban flight to leave urban districts and go to the suburbs. And those suburban districts were insulated from having to engage in desegregation. In addition to Milliken, we've had 30 years now of post-desegregation court orders, and in this scenario, school districts that were previously under court-mandated desegregation orders are no longer so. They're either being released from supervision or the court orders are not being vigorously enforced. And so the combination of Milliken, the lack of enforcement of existing school desegregation orders, and the releasing of school systems from school desegregation orders from a legal perspective is causing increased segregation. And I would say that's particularly true within the larger urban districts, not between districts, but within districts. Without an active desegregation order, we will tend to resort to residential zoning for where students go to school, and as residence is segregated, so are schools. But the most important factor I want to highlight outside of court orders and case law is the role of parental choice. So normatively, we're moving to a system of infusing more choice in where students go to school, whether that's through charter schools or magnet schools. And so there are nice things about parental choice for sure, but we live in a world that is structured by white supremacy, and choice is contoured by race. There's robust research that shows that white parents consistently choose predominantly white environments for their children. The tipping point is somewhere around 20%. If a school is more than 20% non-white, particularly black, white parents tend to not choose that school. So the influx of school choice is allowing racialized choices to be made. How are they made? They are made through what I've written about, a piece called The New White Flight, examines the role that charter schools play in being a white flight outlet for parents in racially diverse urban districts in particular. They will send their children to a charter school, and the charter school can contour the racial segregation by having policies in place that are going to have a disparate impact that excludes students of color. What do I mean by that? If a charter school doesn't provide transportation, then it's less likely that, in particular, low-income students of color are going to have access to it. If a charter school doesn't provide free and reduced lunch, which they are not required to do, it is more likely that low-income students are low-income black and brown students will be default excluded from that school. A more pernicious one that I think doesn't get enough attention is the specific kind of charter school that might come up. So a charter school focused on Latin, for example, or Montessori has a very racialized connotation that is going to attract more white students. The flip side of that is that although parental choice applies to all parents regardless of race, race constrains the actual choices that parents of color have. What that means is that if you are a parent of color, you have to worry about the racial atmosphere of the school. So even if it is, quote unquote, a higher quality charter school, but it's 90% white, you might have reservations of sending your child there. The process for applying to these choice schools might require lots of research and social network connections that people of color, particularly black people, are excluded from. So the racialized nature of choice is causing increased segregation. So while we may applaud the idea that parents should have more choice and autonomy over where their children go to school, we also have to realize the real serious cost of that, which is increased racial segregation because of the way that race contours choice.
That's right.
Powerful.
Yeah, I was
Please.
just going to. Yeah, I just wanted to add on to that. I think the bottom line is this: they're playing from the same playbook from the 1960s. That's what's happening. This is why it's important for us to know our history. White people in America, not all white people. My children always remind me, they're like, Daddy, all white people, you can't say white people, it's some white people. So some white people in America, they are pulling some of the same kind of racist plays that they were doing during the civil rights movement, right? And the biggest thing is that we're trying to discredit public education. If we look at our history, just like we just saw this documentary, our communities are being gentrified. Right, I know even in Alexandria, my hometown, homes that folks had paid $1 million+ for when I was growing up were crack houses with mice and roaches. Right, and I'm always telling the folks that, I'm like, that used to be a crack house. The house looks nice now. It's still small, but it looked nice. But it used to be a crack house. Y'all done stole us from the black community and giving them vouchers to get out of the city. That was on purpose. Right. And that's why we're seeing, because the actual report, we use it in one of my classes this semester from what was it? USC? Was it USC? USC and Stanford. And Stanford. Because what the report stated was that it's been an increase of 64% in regards to segregated schools since 1988. Between black and brown and white students in the 100 largest school districts in America, right? So this is what's happening in our country right now. Another thing I just wanted to mention was I think another issue when we talk about vouchers and we talk about how right now America is trying to say folks need to get money to go to these private schools, right? We need to get them out of the public schools. They're doing this so that white America can have ownership again of the public educational system. So if we take the white people out of, well, first off, if we discredit the current system and we bring in all these accountability systems that are very racist when we're talking about state assessments and report card grades, and you all know about that here in Ohio. We do the same thing in Virginia. what we're doing is we're trying to say schools can't teach. So let us give you money so you can go to these white private schools, or you can create your own white private schools or charter schools so that your child won't have to go to school with these black and brown children, right? And that's what's happening. So I think that's exacerbating the whole, segregation or de facto segregation of our schools.
And I'll tackle on to that about two things, right? The Don't Say Gay bill that happens in Florida. Iowa is passing their own bill right now to basically remove inclusivity out of these systems. Even in Georgia, they're starting to do this whole process of trying to remove African-American, history out of our school systems as well. So when we think about, like you said, from the exterior of demographics, like you said, the residential areas, charter schools, and voucher programs, like you just mentioned, Dr. Hutchings and Professor Wilson, we also have to think about how they're taking out the curriculum as well. All of us should be able to know where we come from. And they're trying to whitewash that to basically say, that's not the right history. This is how history happened for us. And you all shouldn't really care about what, like you said, Native Americans have to go through, what Black people have to go through, what, like I said, people of gender nonconformity or, gender queer people have to go through as well. None of that matters anymore, right? We want to only talk about what white history looks like from today, from now, from the past, even though it's all falsified, right? We know that none of this is true. Like I said, they're writing the textbooks, they're printing out the textbooks, they're saying this is the history that you should know, and that's it. So that's another thing that we have to consider as well is when they're trying to erase all this, where can our kids learn about who they are? It shouldn't just be at home, right? It should also be where they're getting their education from, because they're teaching our kids about our own histories. They're teaching our kids about what we should know. And in these history classes, it shouldn't just be about, Christopher Columbus came and did this. We all know that that's all false as well. So it's just all these small things, like you said, from residential to demographics, like you said, from gentrification, coming in and taking over Black neighborhoods to put white schools there, move them all out, put these nice high-rise apartments and make them like $2,000. Also including as well where our kids are also learning while they're in school. Are they learning enough? Are they learning more about who they are? And it shouldn't be from personal experiences only, technically. They should learn who they are through their identity from the people that they meet, from their own experiences. But it should also be taught what our kids should know about who we are and where we all come from as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Listening brings me to a question for you all around why public schools are the battleground in America for our humanity, for our sense of purpose. The effort to undermine public schools has been going on for quite some time. The move toward vouchers, now the increased access to vouchers, the effort to control the curriculum, right? The places that control the curriculum for our young people are places that are the home for and ground for anti-equity efforts today. Places like Texas. Why are public schools the source, the core location for this kind of attack?
So I'm happy to start us off. I think that one important thing to understand about public schools and public education, it wasn't always there. One thing that people don't know enough about is that it was the post-Civil War Reconstruction era that actually gave us a universal system of public schools, because the formerly enslaved Africans pushed for this as a part of becoming full citizens and members of the democracy. And so when you understand that history, you may also begin to understand that public schools are important infrastructure for American democracy. And not only are they important infrastructure for American democracy, America's not had a true multiracial democracy, maybe ever. We're still in the process of trying to build a true multiracial democracy where we have citizens who, of all races, who are actively participating in the democracy. Public schools make that happen. Public schools are where citizens of different walks of life have a chance to interact with one another. Public schools are where students get a sense of socialization in terms of appropriate norms. They learn how to be citizens in this country. And so the attack on public education is most definitely not an accident. It is an attack on building a true multiracial democracy. If we can use neoliberal techniques to undermine public education and say that people have a choice in where their children go to school, what we will find is that, as I mentioned before, that white students in particular are going to choose to go to predominantly white schools, and that cultivates a certain kind of myopic citizenship that does not allow one to see themselves in community with others, that allows one to participate or push policies that maintain a racial hierarchy. If we control the curriculum in public schools to take out the history, the true history of America, then we make citizens who are less certain of themselves and their history and where they come from. We make citizens who are more likely to defer to white supremacist norms. So it's really important not to give up on public schools and to understand where they are in this chess match for building a multiracial democracy. Again, I would just reiterate that public schools' importance to our democracy becoming a true multiracial democracy is what makes them most vulnerable to attack.
And speaking our truth, like learning our true history, right, is going to force America to realize that we actually have been lied to. I mean, and that's hard. We went out and we made statues, named schools, streets, after folks who were horrific and horrible people. And now you have to own that. Nobody wants to swallow that pill, right? And that's the biggest issue. I now have to say America's history has been a lie. And I think people aren't willing to do it. I think another thing is that why it's so impressionable, or what I was trying to say is that students in pre-K-12 are so impressionable. That's why it's important for us to make sure we're investing, because we really can change the narrative for the future. And that's what people are fearful of as well. I'm starting to see, in schools now, our young people, they are willing to speak up. They are asking questions, right? They want to know their history. They are doing their lineage. They're expressing that white privilege is a thing. And I'm seeing that there are little, rays of light that's coming into our schools today that wasn't happening, I know, when I was growing up. We didn't have conversations around equity or inclusion, right? It was kind of like they told us somebody can't be in there, somebody can't be in there. And we, behind closed doors, talked about it, but we ain't do anything, right? We just talked about it. Now kids are like, you can't do that to such and such. Like, you can't talk to me this way, right? And then back then we were disrespectful if we did that. Now you're speaking your mind. Sometimes it is disrespectful though. I'm like, hold on for a second. You're getting too comfortable. Speak your mind, but not like that, right? It's a way to talk to me. But that was the point I'm trying to make. I digress. Sorry.
I could give from personal experience because I'm only so young. So for me, I technically grew up in Chicago, Illinois, the West Side, which for those who may not have been to Chicago ever before, it's a very predominant black area, very low income neighborhood. I went to an all black school for probably, how long have I been? It's like third grade, fourth grade. Yeah, so my third grade, fourth grade, then I moved to Shaker Heights, Ohio. For me, going into an all-black school where I've seen absolutely no one else except for somebody that looks like me, to then going to Shaker Heights, Ohio, and going to Shaker Heights Middle School to high school, etc. I saw so many different, cultures, ethnicities, and races, right? For me, that was a cultural shock. And like I said, for being so young, I didn't realize that there were other people that didn't look like me at one point. At least that's what I felt. Shaker gave me the ability to expand, to not just look at who I am, but also look at others around me, right? Shaker, I can absolutely say, definitely from the class that I was in 16 when I graduated from Shaker Heights High School. It gave me the light to say that, active participation amongst each other can grow the mind so much. I learned so much from all of my classmates, from the teachers that I had been with and been in these classes, and they made sure that we had autonomy as students there. Obviously, like I said, within respect, of course, but just also making sure that you should know who you are and where you come from. And the students around us, we also made sure that we banded together to say, hey, we should support each other. We were at protests back when, the Black Lives Matter movement was very big. and also just making sure that we're advocating for each other. So I think for me, the biggest thing is just making sure that we have community involvement, which I don't think is very big, especially with, like you said, being targeted within the public schools. People feel like a little bit of fear to band together to basically say, no, we don't want this for our schools. No, we don't want this. Yes, we want the funding. And like I said, more is probably a fear, because people have a fear of getting like backlash. They're just feeling as though that they might not have the freedom that they once had before. So for me, my biggest thing is just making sure that we can always band together to learn from each other. And I think with that, that's how we can kind of push back and just making sure that we get the states or the city, whoever's funding the public schools to say, hey, this is what you need to look at. Because diversity is the fear that they're having because they don't want to have diversity, like you just mentioned, Professor, of a multiracial democracy. They don't want that at all. They want it to just be strictly one way or no way at all. And that's why we're not getting the funding. That's why we're not getting the proper education. And that's why we're the ones that's continuing to be attacked.
All right. Whew. Have to take a breath because there are so many children in the gap. And for me, as someone who leads an organization that serves children with significant learning needs because of developmental challenges, because of mental health challenges, largely rooted in trauma, public schools are their sanctuary. Private schools don't want those young people. And charter schools find ways to move them out. Not all, right, Dr. Hutchings? Not all, but many. And I have sat in a meeting with a loved one as I heard them be told, your family, not only your child, your family is not a fit here. A public charter school. And so this is warfare. And Professor Wilson, your comment about the origins of this being and the emancipation of enslaved people is something we have to hold because there has been this racialized backlash that's persisted and been iterated upon over the past 150 years in an effort to ensure that Black folks in America have very little opportunity, very little advancement, but also so that white children don't see themselves in us and see our shared value, but also power in this democracy. So all of this is so powerful to take in. Dr. Hutchings, you use the word lineage, and it sets me up for this next question, which is, in light of all of this, one looks at Brown and wonders, how do we honor this powerful ruling and the people who fought for it, those freedom fighters who showed up with their brilliance to bring that ruling about? How do we honor their legacy when we know, if we look at it from the lens of was it successful, we know that it's been deeply, deeply undermined? How do we do that?
Like we're doing right now, talking about it, right? Having social justice, events, making sure that we're empowering our young people and educating people on our history. I mean, think about it. And I think about this all the time when I'm on Howard's campus. Walking on Howard's campus, it makes me so proud to be Black. I'm happy to be Black every day, but it's just something different when I'm on an HBCU campus because I know that there were folks who came here to pave the way. They came with nothing, right? They worked in the cafeterias and then became doctors and changed the world. You know what I'm saying? And I think it's important for our young people to be able to feel that and to know that history. I also think that we have to be courageous and bold enough to call it what it is. My work right now is I have an educational consulting firm. My work is on anti-racism. I have many clients that say, can you call it belonging? Can you? And my first year I started doing that. And then I was like, no, I'm not going to just call it belonging anymore. I'm calling it what it is. We need to do anti-racism work. Your system is racist, right? And we need to call it that. We have to stop tiptoeing around the core issue. And that is why we continue to have these problems.
I say you so abrupt. I thought you still have more to go. I was writing it down.
I was going to stop. I said
That was a mic drop, in case you didn't.
For me, the biggest thing that I think about is obviously Brown versus Board of Education, of course, the biggest thing is obviously, eliminating racial discrimination and promoting equality, right? And equity within our school systems and around the world. So for me, my biggest thing is really just having educational equality and equity within it. I think that a lot of times we forget that, like I said, and it's because of all these laws and bills being placed to make that possible, which you would think is kind of unethical, which technically it is, but it's kind of just like, why do we have to place a bill in order to say that we can't talk about, like I said, Black lives and what that looks like, our history, why we can't talk about gender and sexuality to the kids, especially being so young and in a new era now where a lot of kids are coming out and being exactly who they are. I think that that's the biggest thing that we need to focus on. The second one I would say is also addressing intersectionality as well, because we are all made up of different components of who we are. It's not just one sometimes it's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We're talking about an entire chart of different intersections that we can all be a part of that I think we all need to learn from in order for us to be authentic in who we are, but also, like I said, learn from each other, especially when we think about social justice. There's so many different things going on for each and every one of us in this room. So I think being able to know where someone here comes from, where someone else on the other side of the room comes from, where even our panelists all come from as well, helps us understand how we can do better in a society where we want to make it equitable and also just as well. Also promote inclusion and inclusive curriculum. Obviously, for me, that's my biggest thing of work here is just making sure that when we go into the jobs that I work in, or the jobs that we go into as well, alongside even the school systems, is just being like, hey, are we making sure that we're talking about, the issues and things that's going on for all of our employees, or like I said, all of our students, because we don't know what goes on behind closed doors. But as you mentioned, about like basic politics today, right? Talking about the Palestine issue and everything that's going on in Sudan. We also need to know about that as well. It shouldn't just be, hey, we don't need to worry about that. We also just need to worry about this one particular group of individuals here. We need to also consider that too. And I think for me, those are my big three that I like to always highlight because I'm very big at just making sure that we learn about each other, because I think it also helps us understand more of how we can go about society better, and also just making sure that we're fighting for each other as well.
So this is a difficult question for me. How do we honor the lineage and pay tribute to what the freedom fighters who fought for Brown versus Board of Education did? And so I ultimately come down to this. It's important to understand the broader issue that those people were fighting for. They were not fighting just so that we could sit in class next to white people. They were fighting for a more just and inclusive society. They were fighting to take a strike against racial capitalism, because poorly educated Black and brown children are a critical cog in the wheel of racial capitalism. And so at that moment, right, desegregation was the slight blow to that, to open up access and opportunity. The reality is I teach a critical race theory class, and I engage with a term from Professor Reva Siegel called preservation through transformation. What does that mean? It means that certain laws, policies may transform and look different, but they have the same net result, which is racial subordination. And so in terms of honoring the lineage of Brown, it means that we have to be affable and pliable in terms of how we fight these things. It's understanding that the attacks on curriculum, the attacks on anti-racist curriculum, the attacks on public education, the push towards more choice and privatization are all part of the same machinery to reinstate or to maintain a certain racial order and push racial capitalism. The resistance to certain curricular and even students going to school together is very much connected to the resistance and to the attempts to punish speech on Palestine and the genocide in Gaza. All of these things are connected. So how do we honor the lineage? By first realizing the connections, understanding the ways in which those connections feed into racial capitalism and the current order of things, and being willing to push back against them, even when it's hard, and even when it seems hopeless, to continue to have hope and to continue to push forward, try different strategies and approaches, even when it seems like we're butting our heads against a steel wall.
That's right.
Thank you. Yeah. So a couple things that I just want to kind of pinpoint together here is that the work actually continues. Yeah. The state of our schools today is not a reflection on a shortfall of those freedom fighters or of Brown. The legacy of anti-racism is still ours to hold and to carry forward. And that in and of itself honors that legacy. And that is, I think, important for us to continue to hold as we resist the current forms of subjugation and violence that we see in our world today. And Amari, your comments about inclusion and the sense of connection just make me think about the legislation, the coding of opportunity for folks like kids with disabilities, right? Those kinds of laws that make autism services available today to young people stands on the shoulders of this ruling. The inclusion of those young people and the requirement that they be part of the education experience with their typical peers. And so I invite folks who might be parenting or educating neurodiverse young people, who might be white but have trans children. Yeah, it's time to show up. That's right. It's time to link arms because we are all in the crosshairs. So I just want to pinpoint that. Dr. Hutchings, your comments about being compelled to make the anti-racism work you're doing and leading more comfortable for people, more acceptable. And that feels like it flows right out of this quote unquote parents' rights movement that has been sweeping the nation and undermining equity efforts that have been underway in schools we've been trying to do this work in the education system. And so now we have parents, white parents specifically, overrunning boards of education, overrunning Board of Education meetings, forcing out superintendents who are under attack for their efforts to have inclusive curriculum, to have an effort toward creating equitable educational experiences. Black and brown parents aren't even considered. It's as though we are not parents and caregivers to children, and the suffering that I'll speak specifically to Black children because they have the worst outcomes in the education system, are often, they're not contemplated in this parents' rights movement. And so I'm curious how we might push back and amplify the voices of Black parents whose children suffer most in this system.
I was thinking, initially I started thinking, I know you teach a CRT class, and let me not say too much because she might quiz me. I do mine through a CRT lens, right? I don't teach the actual course. But we talk about interest convergence, right? Where that is where you have policies and things that are passed only if it's going to, positively impact white folks, right? And I'm just thinking of that right now as you were talking, because I feel like in communities today, some white people have to feel as if they're getting something out of the deal in order to support it. And that, Black and brown children or families don't deserve enough, right? Or don't deserve it at all. And why are we not going to our source? We always talk about we should have a seat at the table. I say we should create our own table, right? Let's give people the supplies to create their own table so then we can have conversations about Black and brown children. I always say when I walk into a space and they're talking about what our Black families need and what our Hispanic families need, I'm like, but none of them are sitting around the table. How do you know that? Right? Because we're investing all this money into something that is not even what they're asking for, right? So when are we going to go to them? When are we going to stop having PTA meetings in the middle of the day, right? So only our white families who are stay-at-home moms can go, right? When are we going to stop doing that? When are we going to stop allowing folks to come into board meetings in the first place and have public comments about nothing? And I used to love when I was sitting as a superintendent in Shaker Heights. It got worse when I got to Alexandria. Oh my God, because they were liberal racists in my community there. And they would sit and say crazy things. And I'm like, the only reason you say, I would look at them in my mind, I'm saying the only reason you're talking like that is because you know I can't speak at this dais. But meet me out in that hallway after this session, and I'm going to give you a piece of my mind, right? And I made my effort to go out there to give them a piece of our mind. That's what we have to do. We have to be bold enough to say, you're not going to keep talking to me like this. You're not going to keep treating my community like this. And this is what I expect from you. We got to go out and we got to vote. We have to make sure that folks who are not doing things on behalf of Black and brown children, that we find ways to get them out of those seats, right? We have to make sure that Black and brown superintendents have the authority to be able to make the decisions and find those networks so that they are lifted up, because it is tough when you are Black and brown trying to fight a fight when you are also a victim. Right? So these are the things that I feel need to happen in order. This is why I'm doing the work that I do now. Like, I mean, I thankfully got to leave my superintendency, which is not used to Black. They were shocked. How can a Black man say, I'm now not going to be working with y'all anymore? Right, in Alexandria. I'm now going to start my own business. Everybody wanted it to be scandal and controversy because that's typically how Black folks get kicked out, right? I'm just telling y'all, this is real talk. They didn't know how to handle, here's my resignation. This is my time to go change the world and not just be pigeonholed to work here. And I'm tired of acquiescing to your nonsense, right? And we got to be bold enough to say, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to react and respond, and take it on a broader scale. So now that I'm not in the superintendency, people think, oh, well, it must be easier. No, it's actually more difficult, because now I work with multiple school systems in multiple states and multiple craziness, right? Not just one place. But I do get to get on a plane and go home and have my little glass of wine or vodka on the plane going back. Whatever I choose to do, which I couldn't do as a superintendent. I was drinking water all the time. But I'm going in public, right? At home, I did my own thing. But those are my pieces. I just added that ad-lib, that last part.
Sometimes a little adult beverage is in order.
That's right.
That's why I work virtually, so I can do it at home. For me, a lot of things that I've seen, and most of it comes, like you said, from organizations who are trying to be more inclusive of everyone that they're working alongside with, is being intersectional approaches in policy, right? What policies do you have in place at your organization that allows people of different backgrounds to be able to take over those leadership positions? It shouldn't just be one-sided. It shouldn't just be strictly one race, one ethnicity, et cetera. It should all be diverse, because in order for us to build, we have to be able to work together and see from different insights, to learn from each other. So the biggest thing alongside that, to kind of coexist with that, is being able to have community building as well. Being able to connect outside with those who are in this district, in these organizations, in the school system. We have to be able to learn together in order to understand the racial and social groups that make up this entire school that we're working inside with. So it shouldn't just be one or the other. Like you said, we have to be able to say, hey, I have to also get insights from this parent or from this mother in order to understand how I can do better for their children, and vice versa, and et cetera. So for me, those are the biggest things that I see a lot, because most times people feel as though they don't have to know because they don't need to know. And for me, the biggest thing that I learned is that people will never know if you do not educate them, which is obviously all of our jobs here. But if they will never know unless you educate them. And sometimes you have to force it as well. Like, a lot of times people have me come in because they say our employees don't want to know, but we're making them, like I said, we're making them know what they need to know. So for me, I think, being able to have that and also cultural competence as well, is another thing I want to add on top of that, because like I said, we just have to learn from each other in order for us to all grow, but also making sure that we're making an establishment where everyone can kind of come in and also feel welcome, because sometimes people do not feel welcome and they don't want others to feel welcome. But you have to force that. Like you just mentioned, you have to stand your ground and making sure that people are always aware of what's in front of them, because it's never going to change. It's just going to continue to build up and build up and build up. So those would be my big three.
So I would say, in terms of the parental rights, I put that in quote, movement, these people showing up at school board meetings and pushing things in terms of what the curriculum should be. that we have to realize that is not organic, okay? It is a concerted and organized effort, starting with people like Christopher Rufo, who began the backlash against critical race theory, but he's not even the originator. There are moneyed interests behind this push. When you see these moms or whomever, moms against X, Y, and Z, just understand this is the result of organization. I think that's one of the biggest misgivings about the parental rights movement, that it's some organic group of parents, moms, dads, whatever, who came together to push for what they want for their kids. That's not accurate. It is the result of power building and organizing. And I think that we need a similar tact for Black and brown parents. It starts with power, right? Building power. These groups have taken advantage of what we call localism or local control in education in order to perpetuate a message that, when you really query the average parents, is not even resonating with the majority of parents in many places. This is all very much part of some of the broader issues that I talked about earlier in terms of maintaining a particular racial order or hierarchy. So I think the best thing that Black and brown parents can do, and white parents too, who feel very differently about this, is to destabilize the organizing efforts of these white parents to have our own blocks of power and organizing, because we have numbers. They don't. Remember that. And a lot of these people are not organically coming together. If we can coalition build and use these same local processes to push what we want, I think it's a very important counterbalance to what we're seeing happening now with these parents' rights people.
Absolutely. I want to just take a moment to lift up Honesty for Ohio Education and the work that's happening to, big love to that organization and the efforts there to help us organize ourselves around resistance to the anti-equity efforts here in Ohio. So I think I need to move to Q&A so that folks can eat lunch. And as I do that, I don't want to leave this conversation without us having a moment to say, how do we sustain the momentum, the energy to persist in the struggle for racial equity and justice for Black and brown children in this nation, knowing that we tired. Like, truth is, we tired. We have been in the struggle for generations, and it shows up in our bodies, as was mentioned earlier. It shortens our lives, and so we need some capacity for hope, determination, joy, and rest. And so if you could say just a few words as we transition into the Q&A with the audience about how we do that.
Sorry, I'm happy to say that hope is a discipline. This is what Miriam Makeba teaches us. And so part of remaining hopeful and resisting rest is a discipline. It means that you need to rest intentionally, but it also means that you have to be very pragmatic about keeping hope and pushing forward. Hope is a discipline.
For me, I feel as though you just can't give up on yourself and the others around you is my biggest thing. I never give up. Some days I have times where it's hard to do, primarily because I am tired, and I am fatigued from just being able to go from one place to another to basically explain myself over and over again. But my biggest thing is to make sure that you never give up on those around you, because you hope one day that they don't give up on you as well. That's the biggest thing I would take away.
In addition, I would say self-care, but not just going to the spa and, to the movies, because I do all that stuff too during the week when everybody's at work. That makes me feel good sometimes. But it's about looking in the mirror and telling yourself that you're enough. That's self-care. In spite of anything that you have been through in your life, in spite of any obstacle that you've been faced with, you are still enough. And if we keep telling ourselves that, we're going to be able to keep getting back into this fight and having the strength to move forward so this next generation doesn't have to deal with this.
Thank you for indulging that question. Important recommendations. So with that, we're going to transition to you all and invite you to ask questions of this esteemed and brilliant panel.
Well, good morning, almost afternoon. My name is Gabe Crenshaw. I'm an alumni. I would first like to say that I wish this program existed 20 years ago when I was a student here at Case. But I also want to ask one thing that I feel like isn't spoken enough about in regards to Brown versus Board of Education is how it eliminated so much of the Black teaching population. So now a lot of our public school students are in these districts where 80% of the teachers are white women. For example, I have a senior, and she does not have one teacher who looks like her. So what does the teaching profession look like in the future to you all? Especially with also the introduction of AI. I would also like to note is that I also serve on the school board of one of our inner ring suburbs here. And the reason that I decided to do that is because I recognize the opportunity for cultural competency on the board. We have a board of 5. I'm currently the only Black member of the board, but yet our district is, by the time we get to high school, 85% Black, because we do have those white families who are not sending their kids to the public schools simply because it is too Black.
I just want to say, I love that you brought up the fact that we are now seeing a shortage, but it is due to Brown v. Board of Education. And let me just give just a quick insight as to why. If you don't know Jim Crow's Pink Slip by Leslie Fenwick, she's the Dean Emeritus at Howard University School of Ed. She writes explicitly about this. Brown v. Board of Education was intended to not only integrate Black students into white schools, it was also supposed to integrate Black educators into white schools. Right. So it was, but what happened was, one, it was with all deliberate speed. Remember that part, right? 2, white schools at that time said, we are not going to hire any of these Black teachers. We're going to let the students come in here, but you can't come in here. So thousands of Black educators all over the South lost their jobs. Right? They were principals, assistant principals, teachers, counselors, and they were out of work. That's why they became cafeteria workers, because they needed to have money, right? And over time, that is where we saw that decrease. So I always challenge, especially now that I'm in DC, I challenge, our policymakers to say, this is a national crisis because you all created it. You created this national crisis. And in order for us to change this narrative, we're going to have pipelines for Black educators. We got to start them early. We can't wait until you decide what school you want to go to. We need to stop speaking negatively about public education. I tell teachers that all the time when they say, oh, you don't want to be a teacher. I'm like, oh, you absolutely want to be a teacher. Teaching is one of the best jobs in America, in the world, because you can mold the next generation. Look how much power that is. If we start using that narrative to talk to our young people, more folks will go in to education. But I just wanted to make that point that this crisis is started because Black educators were all put out of work from the 60s through the 70s. And now we're seeing the brunt end of, of all of those consequences that came from that.
Can I just also add that I have a twin sister and she's a teacher, and so from the perspective of a Black teacher, we talk about this all of the time. The other public policy thing that can be done now is to make it more attractive to be a teacher, regardless of race. We need much higher wages. We need better conditions in the classroom. These things, I mean, we're headed towards, and where I'm at, North Carolina, we have a gross teacher shortage because they're not making enough money. They don't have enough benefits. So certainly, given the racial wealth gap, those conditions of the teaching profession itself make it even less attractive for young folks in college to want to go and be a teacher if they have large amounts of debt and they're not making a livable wage. So I think we have to fix that too.
I'm gonna add one thing to the both of these. is that I've heard from friends of mine who are teachers currently, and those who are past teachers have been harassed from those who hold higher positions above them. Because of that harassment, and these are normally coming from those who are, normally white, who, like you said, who take up the higher positions of like principal, superintendent, etc. They're basically pushing them out to bring in more teachers that look like them, to, like I said, follow the same policy and practices that they follow, to, like I said, now push out everybody else that don't look like them. So I want to make sure that we have support for our teachers, the Black teachers who are out there and are facing these disadvantages for them, because if we don't give them support, they will never want to go back either. They'll want to just go do something else. Like you said, take a cafeteria job. It's just less of a mess that they have to deal with. But I don't even think, like, from a teacher perspective, that it only is affecting them. I also think it is affecting all Black workers in these public schools as well. So I just want to make sure that we have also support for our teachers when they are going through these issues of harassment, discrimination within education, because if we don't, they will never want to go back.
And I know you asked a question about AI. I just want to say Your Way. It's your WAI, right? Your Way. And this is a AI software that is culturally competent, right? Because a lot of our AI systems like ChatGPT, which I use a lot of our AI software. But I put this in ChatGPT. Can you say this like a Black person? Right? Can you put some culture in there? Right? Your Way will make sure that it is culturally relevant in language that's culturally relevant. It's a new system that is out. It's a Black owner named Jason Green who invented this software, but it's now becoming big. I think they're talking in New York City and all these other places, but that's just one way where we're having, a more cultural voice when it comes to AI that's out there.
Thank you for that question. Context, historical context, and conditions of work is what's coming up for me. Where are we? Thank you.
I wanted to tie into a point that Professor Wilson made, and because I think it is seminal in terms of what we're facing. When we look at the origin story of this nation, regardless of what the official narrative has been with respect to education, this nation was organized around two fundamental principles. The first was capital, and that is who owns what. And in order to activate capitalism, we had the second organizing principle of race. Race was constructed to divide labor to activate capitalism. So as we discuss all of these things, we're at the edge of the end of the first quarter of the 21st century, and the issues we are discussing are the same issues with respect to race and all of the vicissitudes of what comes from it as we could have been discussing 10, 15, 20, 30, 100 years ago, because we have not confronted the core organizing principles. These things continue to manifest, and my concern is that 10, 15, 20, 100 years from now, we will still be having this type of discussion, because to the point that Professor Wilson made, a part of the big problem is not the experience that the oppressed are having. In that Dahl test from Brown v. Board, what they proved was white people gain a sense of privilege. And when you introduce the construct of race, at the very beginning, even the poorest whites understood a primacy on being white. Even if they didn't have capital, they appreciated and they knew they were white. And that's what I'm saying we are seeing with Donald Trump, a manifestation of the fear that white people feel that this system is changing. And so I say to you again, how do we confront the fundamental core? Because as Dr. Wilson is pointing out, at every step of the way, there are guardrails being reconstructed to continue what was the original organizing principles, and that is rich white at the top and poor Black at the bottom. So how do we deal with that so that we don't have to have this type of meeting and discourse 100 years from now?
That's right.
I mean, that's the fundamental question. I think the first step, I always say, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? So the very first step in tackling this problem is to correctly name and label the problem. I always tell my students, if you frame the problem wrong, you're going to get the solution wrong, which is why all the hyper focus, especially on schools, on segregation of black and brown students, I argue is misguided, and that we need to look at the flip side of that. And so what do we do about this fundamental problem that race was indeed a central organizing principle of life in America, that it continues to be, and capital as well? I say, and I want to be very clear on this, so I'm not misconstrued or misquoted. The very first step is deconstructing whiteness. What do I mean by that? Whiteness as a social category has to be deconstructed. That does not mean to do harm to those who are raced as white. It does not mean to erase those who are raced as white. It means that the category of whiteness is a social construct that has to be dismantled. White people are not white. They didn't become magically white. They are Irish. They are Italian. They are a whole conglomeration of different ethnicities. The category of whiteness itself is the quintessential problem in terms of the aspiring to whiteness. Even though we have demographic shifts or changes, there are questions about certain groups melding into whiteness. Will certain Asian groups become white? Will certain Latino groups become white? The very first step has to be the destruction of the category of whiteness. Again, not people raced as white, but that category. We cannot move forward as long as we have that as an organizing hierarchical principle, where we have people and groups that are shifted into that category that continue the same lines of oppression in order to maintain a particular racial order. So how do we do it? I don't know, but I think that's an important conceptual understanding first, that the deconstruction of that category is a critical first step.
I know we have a couple hands in the air over here.
Yes. So I need you guys to get inorganic, like the white folks are doing, because you're asking a population and community of people who are not engaged. We're talking about a population. I used to work in the system. I used to work in the social service system. I've been an educator. You're talking about a city where the population of high school graduates was less than 30% for almost a decade. And now they got kids in the system. How can we expect them to be responsible parents if they haven't been through the process and respect the educational process? We need for you folks, the educational leaders and opinion makers, to develop this inorganic process for us that we can use. Because we sued the district. We sued the district to try to get them to avoid doing the transformation plan that they did, that put age inappropriate children together in K-8 schools. You got 5-year-old children going to kindergarten with 16-year-old 8th graders driving to school. Okay, and this is something that we fought and no one listened. Leadership didn't listen. So I'm hoping that you folks, or folks like you, can help us develop this inorganic process and plan that filters out to all of us, that we can push upon those folks, because a lot of people who sit in front of us look just like us and tell us no.
Yeah. Okay, so we got that one question. I saw a lot of hands here, and I want to be careful or intentional about getting multiple voices in the room. So what I'm going to do is, you guys got that one. I'm going to ask, if you had your hand raised, for you to ask your question as succinctly as you possibly can, so that more voices can be in the room, and then you all get to take which pieces and parts you can from those questions. Okay, so I have one here, and I'm going to the one right after her.
Hi, this is Lou with the unpopular ideas for you to think about. If we want all the people to stand up, but right now our situation actually is, if you use Howard University as an example, hypothetically, now you build a good structure to help black students and black teachers to be educated and share informations. But now, if Howard University accepts white students, now some of the students or their parents and the faculty decided, no, we don't want white people in. We quit. We leave. Then what to do?
That question. I'm coming here.
Yeah, so my question is kind of bringing us back to the beginning of the discussion. You were talking about a lot of how the different communities are kind of naturally segregating themselves, and that partly due to just the natural tendency of people to want to be with people who look like them and think like them. And so, but of course that's kind of counter to the principle of trying to create a diverse community. So how do we fight that natural what can we do about that natural tendency to try to surround ourselves with people who are like us, and make sure we're getting all the voices at the same table instead of having little groups of like-minded people in these little bubbles?
Okay, got that question. I'm coming here, and then I saw one there, and then, so, yep.
I'd like to ask a question regarding public schools. One of the things that is happening nationwide is the lack of funding. Most of your large cities are like Cleveland. The structures as far as financial ability is deteriorating. So are there any ideas about nationally funding public schools?
As I walk to the next person, I'm going to say there's a news report out today that says Ohio in fiscal year 2024 gave nearly $1 billion to public school choice.
Hi, so I am a white parent of a white child in Cleveland, and myself and a friend of mine have been going through this process of removing our kid from charter schools, and the difference in the Cleveland public schools has been so positive. And so it's kind of this like realizing, we both grew up in Cleveland in the 80s and 90s, realizing, feeling like suckers and a little bit embarrassed also, and reckoning with our own kind of like complicity in that. And so my question is, especially for Dr. Grimes, but for everyone, kind of how white people talk about how white supremacy harms white people, like sort of in the doll test that you referenced, without making it also about like the interest conversion that Dr. Hutchings mentioned, where it's like, I'm talking about this now because there's something in it for me. Both of our kids are neurodivergent, so that plays a big role as well. I'm sorry for going on, but kind of like how white people can do the work of talking about deconstructing whiteness, how whiteness harms white people as well, without centering yourself as a victim, or that's something I'm wrestling with.
Okay, so this might be a little unpopular or radical, but just touching back onto that natural tendency to want to segregate and the initial inception of the public school system with the separate but equal, has there been any consideration given to actually solidifying at the pre-K through like the elementary level, actually implementing separate but equal schools where the education is centered and cultivated towards the ethnicities that people naturally gravitate towards, with the integration piece being at the collegiate level, where colleges kind of attract the most bright, and they attract talent through being a business, through offering resources, so that as you make the decision to kind of go into a higher level of education, the onus is on you to want to be multicultural, because when you come to the college level, you're going to see that the colleges are attracting students who are multicultural. And so it makes a more equitable experience, to where instead of the system being more so set up towards white people and then others kind of integrating into that system, it's colleges are attracting from various groups, and it's on everyone to learn about all of the cultures that they will encounter as they get into higher education.
I think I caught all of the hands. I think I caught, we got, all right. I see 2 more hands I'm gonna get, and I need them to be actual questions. 2 more hands. Miss Scott, I'm watching, I'm listening.
Yes. Oh. I have considered going back to school to become a teacher because it's in my blood. I had 3 aunts who were teachers. What should I do to prepare myself to take on this role and to address these things?
Thank you, Miss Scott. One last question, and then panel. I know I gave y'all a smorgasbord, but I have all the faith that y'all will pick and choose what you have something to say on. You don't have to say something on everything. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming today, and thank you to SJI for organizing this event and for bringing awareness and understanding of the situation and how we got here. The next step, of course, is action, and Habeebah Grimes said the work continues. And so my question for each of you is, are there specific actions that you can ask us to take? Not just voting and expecting the politicians to solve things, which the system isn't going to let them do most of what they say they want to do, or not just joining a movement, but to do what? Are there specific doable things that you can ask of each of us and for people in the broader social justice movement?
Thank you for that, Frank. I think they've answered that a few times, but if it's something more you want to add, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, one, it's okay to that you gravitate towards somebody that looks like you. I don't have a problem. I feel like this is what I feel people need to stop apologizing for. If I want to go sit at the table with all black people, that's my prerogative, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? And I say that as being at a HBCU, right now, and I also attended a PWI as well, and I learned something from both. So there's not a right and wrong to it. It's just whatever you feel most comfortable with. But there are times where you're going to have to lean into your discomfort, meaning you cannot completely isolate yourself with that group. At some point, you're going to have to see me and show up and hear me and listen to me and do something if I ask you to do it, right? And I just feel like we shouldn't shame people. I know you weren't doing it, I'm just saying, but I think in society we're starting to do that. I also just wanted to mention in regards to action, right? Coming to sessions like this is only the first step, right? It's what do you do when you walk out of these doors? Are you now speaking up when you hear somebody speak negatively about another race in that room, when there isn't no other person of color in that space? You as a white person are speaking up for that person. Don't act like you know us, because you don't, right? But however, you can advocate and say, hold on for a second, we're not going to do that in this space. Why did you make that comment? Or why don't we give this person an opportunity? We also need to make sure that we're going out, and if we don't have children in the schools, give to our public school systems and be a voice for our public school systems, whether your kids are grown or not. Sometimes we get our kids through the system and then we take hands-off approach, meaning we're done. And there are other kids who may not have parents to advocate for them. So you still need to be at that table and advocating and speaking on their behalf regardless. I want some of the other things, but everybody else got to talk, so I'll talk to you all after this.
Yeah, I'll just touch on 2 of the ones. The one about naturally gravitating towards those who are like yourself. I agree, there's nothing wrong with that, but I would just push back and say in the context of schools and choice, it seems to me that white parents are incentivized to put their children in predominantly white environments because they get better educational inputs and it's perceived as doing more for their children. The example I give, there was a school in Riverside that was predominantly white that was going to be named after Martin Luther King Jr. And the parents fought vigorously against that because they didn't want colleges to think their kids went to a predominantly black school. So I think part of it is maybe a natural affinity, but a big piece of the school part is the idea that being in a predominantly white school gives you something tangibly better than you would otherwise get. And I think we have to really destabilize that by having more integrated schools so that parents aren't incentivized to make choices that reify white segregation. Similarly, on the question of can we have contribute to more the reality of things, segregated K through 12, and then in college we try and integrate. I would say that is certainly an approach that Charles Hamilton Houston and Thurgood Marshall and all the others before us, they tried to make the equal part of separate work, and it didn't. And the realities of the way that race and white supremacy work, I'm not optimistic that it is possible to ever make the separate part equal here in America. It also in some ways could feed the beast of what I talked about earlier in terms of the construction of whiteness. And I think we want to be doing the exact opposite of that and not giving more power to this concept of whiteness.
And I'll say to kind of piggyback off that is kind of, how do you frame how you want to approach the table? Like I said, being comfortable being uncomfortable was the biggest thing here, right? You have to be able to go into spaces and actually showcase that you are being empathetic and that you're being compassionate about making the next steps to, like I said, ending that desegregation, right? A lot of times it is how you communicate. It is how you have your body language that comes up to these tables. How are you presenting yourself? Like I said, we don't want you to come off as a victim, right? I can tell that you're trying to come in and just be like, hey, I see that this is an issue. This is a problem. These are things that I've experienced from both sides. And I want to be able to add my input in without it feeling as though I'm trying to take over, right? And like I said, a lot of times that just comes from how you're framing a question, how you're presenting a question, and like I said, how are you showing compassion among that as well? So that kind of takes a little bit of some practice most of the time. Even like for me, sometimes when I'm in a presentation doing speeches, I have to be very specific on how I'm framing things to make sure people know that I'm being genuine about the social justice activism that I'm trying to do, and as an educator. So I think it's just more coming in with a purpose, of course, is letting the people know ahead of time, like, hey, this is why I'm here. This is what I've seen as a parent who has seen it from one side and actually seen it from multiple sides now. This is how I want to be able to assist and how can I help? I think that's the biggest thing for you.
Wonderful. Okay, so if I could just ask you all to give a good round of applause to our panel, 70 years later, what Brown cannot do. Thank you all.